Q&A. I also remind you that we have both in-person and online audiences. I encourage you to send your questions. Our first speakers are Professors Eduardo Elias Gutierrez and Diego Amador Magaña, who will give a presentation titled, "Can Universal Citizenship Be Possible? A Conceptual Analysis of Citizenship." Eduardo Elias Gutierrez is a professor researcher at the Tijuana Law School of Universidad Autónoma de Baja California and a candidate level member of the National System of Researchers in Mexico. Diego Amador Magaña is a doctorate on law at the Northwestern Research and Teaching Station of the Institute for Legal Research of Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México.
Well, I'm going to start my time, so to respect the time of everyone here and online. Well, this text or this paper is written by Eduardo and by myself, and I'm going to try to get straight to the point. So what Eduardo and I try to present to all of you, it's that maybe it's possible to think in a universal citizenship, and we use the example of the European Union and the European Parliament, so we can create kind of membership in international realm. So I'm going to make some thoughts, some ideas around this paper, and be so glad if you can help me with this ideas that I have. First of all, what Eduardo and I believe about citizenship and what we thought and we analyze is that maybe citizenship could be reduced to a simple legal status. And why we believe that membership could be reduced to this? Well, it's because when we study the public discourse, the public speech, for example, Donald Trump, public speech against migrants, the Brexit, or this idea of illegal or legal migrants or regularization of migrants, makes us believe that maybe, just maybe, citizenship is a mere legal status. But you can tell that, for example, I not putting attention in the cultural scope of citizenship or the political realm, and I'm just focusing in the legal status. Well, to acknowledge these realms, the psychological one and the political one, and last, the legal one, what we do is to pay attention in what Joseph Cairns defined as a three-dimension of citizenship: the psychological one, the legal one, and the political one. I'm going to start with the psychological one. What we believe in our lecture of Joseph Cairns is that this aspect of citizenship that belongs to the idea of this cultural relationship, this emotions that we have with a specific territory, with the specific partners that we have under a specific territory, is important, but it's not decisive in creating membership. I put a little example to make myself a little clear in this point. Let's think that I'm Mexican, but I'm a huge fan of New York Yankees, and I have a big emotion, and I have a sense of belonging to the New York Yankees club of fans, and I feel like an American citizen that lives in New York because I love the Yankees. The reality is that I'm not, and I will not be an American until I present myself in United States and be a resident and fulfill the norms that they have to be a citizen. So this part of fulfillment, the normative status, is what we believe is the reduction that we defend of citizenship as a mere legal status. So if psychological aspects or cultural aspects as only part of citizenship and not a decisive one, what are the decisive things to make citizenship a real citizen one? We believe, and this is our thoughts, we might be wrong, so we believe that is, first of all, being part of a political group, being part of a community, and second one, fulfill these rules that the membership established to be part of. Again, this is a legal aspect of membership, not a other one. Someone could tell that, well, that's a political one too, but what political fulfillment requires, I believe, well, we believe, Eduardo and I believes, is what Joseph Cairns associates with political obligations and this legitimacy that we do with our states. And this come around with, again, this status that we have under a state and how we defend the rules or how we obey the rules and how we participate, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is if this can only be a state or it could be applied in international scope. If we turn our attention to David Miller or Martha Nussbaum critiques to cosmopolitan views, we can tell that citizenship can be only possible under nation states ideas because the institution of state can fulfill these rules and can protect the necessities of people inside a state. But if these two conditions, we believe, Eduardo and I, that we have to be part of a political community and they have to be some kind of rules to fulfill this membership status, that you can own this membership, we believe that this idea of citizenship can be applied also in international scope. And how is this? Let's turn our attention to European Union and how they work with the European Parliament and how they create some rules to give a macro citizen to the people who work or who lives in the European Union. For example, they are called European citizens, but they have a micro citizenship for Spaniards to Italians and all the people who live in Europe and are part of this membership called European Union. Some can tell that this is problematic because we're acting like in certain way so authoritarian that we're forcing international membership, but we believe this can be a voluntarian one. This could be voluntaristic. And how can this be voluntaristic? Well, if we, again, turn our attention to the European Union, not all the states that are in the continent of Europe are part of the European Union. In a voluntaristic way, they participate in this European Parliament. And if that is possible, maybe, just maybe, that could be possible in Latin America and possible in Africa and other places. We can turn this conceptual of legal citizenship applied in international scope. Of course, someone can say that, well, to be part of a member, you have to create a certain status of us and the others. You have to make some distinctions. And your idea of international or universal citizenship will not create these distinctions between us and them or nationals and strangers, or macro citizens, and those who will not participate in this universal idea that we had. But we believe, again, if we point out that universal citizenship could be thought in a voluntaristic way, that we participate and we create some norms and we reduce this to a legal aspect, only a legal aspect, it could be possible for us to think an international or a universal citizenship in the long run. And why I say to the long run, well, here in the panel, we already talked this, that's quite materially improbable to do it right now. And we believe too, unfortunately, we believe to this too, that it's not probable to do it right now. But in the long run, if we use institutions that we have, the UN, the World Trade Bank, et cetera, maybe this concept, this legal concept, can be used in the long run to create a universal citizenship. We know, and this is a sad conclusion that we arrived, that the barriers to make this universal citizenship possible, frankly, is not in the realm of conceptual thought, or is not in the aspects of legal thought. It's in the political scene, to be more clear. We have a lack of political participation to rejoin us and make international citizenship. We are living in times that nationalists, with the poll discourse, for example, Trump again, we're making again a separatist way of living, and an idea of only citizens can be inside borders and not outside borders. So that's all I want to tell about this paper. I'm very respectful with time. So I don't know if Eduardo is online, so I guess it's not. And so thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Diego. Now I am delighted to introduce our second speakers, Professor Alejandro Mosqueda, Rubén Chávez, and Camelia Tigau, who will speak about citizenships and exclusions. Alejandro Mosqueda has a PhD in philosophy from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He has been a member of the National System of Researchers since January 2021. He has taught ethics at the College of Philosophy of the School of Philosophy and Literature of the UNAM and in the Department of Humanities of the UAM, Coajimalpa. He is currently a professor in the Department of Philosophy at the Autonomous University of Aguascalientes. His lines of research are ethics, metaethics, social philosophy, and political philosophy. Rubén Chávez holds a PhD in social and political science by the UNAM. He is currently an associate researcher at the Unit for Migration Policy, Registry, and Identity of Persons of the Mexican Ministry of Internal Affairs. He has worked as a public servant and researcher for various Mexican institutions, such as the Mexico City government, the Senate, El Colegio de México, and the Center for Economic Research and Teaching. Rubén Chávez is also a photographer of migration. His work, Southern Border of Mexico, The Flow of Suchiate, was recently exhibited at the Mexican Senate at the Intercultural University of the State of Puebla. Camelia Tigau is an associate researcher at the Center for Research on North America, UNAM. She studied journalism at the University of Bucharest and the schools of journalism in Utrecht and Aarhus. She holds an MA in Communication and a PhD in Social and Political Sciences from UNAM. She serves as a regional vice president of the Global Research Forum on Diasporas and Transnationalism, India, and is on the expert committee of Migration News. She is a prolific writer on skilled migration and scientific diplomacy. She is a level 2 member of the National System of Researchers in Mexico. In 2022, she received the UNAM Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz Award. You can start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susana. It was a large introduction. And I want to say thank you to Sandra and Enrique for this great workshop. I will share my screen. I will present the section 1 and 3 of our paper, and Camelia will present the section 2 of our paper, Citizenship, Regimes and Exclusion, a case study of legislation on unauthorized immigration in the US. A difference of the last presentation, we are focusing legal notion of citizen and the legal dimension of citizen and some of the consequences of this legal dimension. Okay, this will be the context of the presentation. First of all, we will talk about citizenship regimes and unauthorized immigration. Second, we will talk about case study, legislation on unauthorized immigration in the US 1995 and 2022. And in the last part, we want to share our conclusion about how this kind of legislation causes this conception that is by Nora Lowry, precarious citizenship. Okay. Citizen regimes are an institutional notion of citizenship, and this marks the institutional dimension in which states grant access to citizenship membership and associated rights. Citizenship is the institution in which political, civil, and social rights are enacted and enjoyed by political subjects. Membership, as you can see, is an essential component of citizenship. To be a citizen is to be a member of a certain political community. The rights provided by citizenship have historically been tied to the state. Since the late 20th century, states have monopolized the authority to grant citizenship through citizenship regimes. This is the notion that we use in the paper. Citizenship regimes are institutionalist system of formal and informal norms that define access to membership as well as rights and duties associated with membership to a certain political community. This notion is based in some authors. We use two of them. One is Roger Brubaker, and the other is Jessamine Soisal. Brubaker says that the essential, necessary, and inherent sovereign capacity the states possess to define citizenship membership, and Soisal emphasizes the institutional rules and definition of the global system provide models and constraints to the policies of the states regarding access to citizenship. Both authors emphasize this notion of the states behind the notion of citizenship. The difference is that Brubaker is thinking only about the states, and Soisal is thinking about more about international notion of citizenship. Okay, citizenship regimes use immigration policies to define access to membership. Authors such as Michael Balzer and David Miller argue that states have the right to limit access to citizenship to protect the interests of their members, such as shared values, identity, security, etc. Since citizenship regimes affect fundamental human interests, such as rights, freedoms, and protection, they inevitably raise moral dilemmas. Human movement across borders is certainly one of the major tests to evaluate the justice of citizenship regimes. And we want to evaluate this with this case of study that will present Camelia.
Okay. Thank you so much. I will be short to just have time for discussion. Our case study is legislative action on unauthorized migration in the US between 1995 and 2022. This is also part of what Ruben has done in his PhD thesis, but we adapted and updated for this article. Next, please. We do this historical analysis based on what the Congress promoted to reduce the unauthorized migration. We define it, as you all know, as persons who reside in a country in which they have no legal permission to be present. And we see that there is a very intense legislative production in this during these 28 years. We see there are a lot of proposals of law, but most of these initiatives fail to become law, or even worse, they are approved to their due to their restrictive character. And also, next please, they are more intense before elections. So we see that 93% of these laws didn't come as laws, and all the initiatives that sort of try to improve the situation of undocumented migrants really are presented by the executive. So what we do in the article, we don't have time to expose everything in detail now. We give a statistical analysis this legislation to reform the U.S. immigration system. Then we look at what are the approved initiatives and success stories, and we end with a discussion for the case study. Next, please. We see that in order for a law to become law in the US and maybe in other countries as well, it has to be introduced to the House of Representatives or the Senate, then pass through the other chamber, pass the second chamber, turn to the president, and then becomes law. So there are these 5 steps that are important to know, because this explains why we have more than 3,000 initiatives and very few became law. Next, please. So we found these 3,343 initiatives that sought to reformulate, correct, or amend the immigration policy of the United States between this period. And next, please, Alejandro. What are the approved? So very few were approved. They were approved because of the political agenda. They were the ones linked to terrorism after 2001. For instance, they were presented as an issue of national interest. They were results of political agreements and consensus between parties. They were results of negotiation between decision makers and stakeholders. Most of them, we see that they are restrictive rather than permissive to unauthorized migration. So they don't really solve unauthorized migration in the way that we would like to be solved, at least looking at the problem from Mexico. And next, please. So what we found is a clearly restrictive trend that is likely to control. It spans over 28 years, but maybe it will continue. Permissive initiatives are presented by the executive rather than by the legislative power. And we see that events such as the suspension of the DACA program, the expedited removal process for unauthorized migrants, the safer country agreements between the US and Central American countries, the reintroduction of the migrant protection protocols with Mexico are real examples of this restrictive nature of the US migration policy, in which selective citizenship is a sign of precarious status for these labor migrants and asylum seekers. And also, we see that many of these laws were proposed before the elections, so they have more of an electoral purpose to show that politicians are worried about the topic, but they are not really interested in legislating about it. We see also that this major restrictive trend is not correlated to the governmental change or the party in power. Rather, it is part of the US immigration system, some call it a machinery, to restrict migration and allow citizenship in exchange for skills and racial criteria, rather than on what people contribute to that country. And this is not, even though we study the US in particular. This is a global trend of globalized migration policies, globalized governance that can be observed in other countries of destination, main countries of destinations for migrants, such as, for instance, Australia or other countries, but we only study the US in this paper. And this has maybe a purpose to maintain low-cost immigrant labor force that was proved to be essential during the pandemic. And this is the case study. Alejandro will get the conclusions.
Okay, thank you, Camelia. And then we have the conclusion of this case study, that is precarious citizenship. Citizenship can be a helpful tool when seen as the institution through which civil, political, and social rights are enacted and enjoyed. At the same time, it can generate some pessimism when we see how these rights are distributed. The pessimism about citizenship is often framed in relation to the increasingly restrictive barriers that are being placed on international mobility and maintaining citizenship itself. Citizenship, understood as a dynamic institution that it mediates rights between political subjects and states, defends the inclusion, membership, and permanence of certain individuals at the expense of others who are excluded by being considered non-members and who are consequently marginalized from the rights that this institution grants. By being denied access to citizenship, unauthorities and migrants are deprived of the right to have rights. Citizenship provides the right to have rights because membership of the citizen body gives access to the institutional rights offered by a political community. The exercise of political citizenship offers a means for claiming rights and shaping the ways they are conceived and implemented. As states have monopolized the authority of recognized and legislated citizenship, they have created a margin of people who lack access to citizenship rights. Consequently, unauthorities and migrants experience what Nora Lori calls precarious citizenship. It's the structured uncertainty of being unable to secure permanent access to citizenship rights. Okay. The high tendency failure of the initiatives to offer legal pathways to residence and citizenship for unauthorities and migrants in the US shows a strategic government response to avoid resolving dilemmas about citizenship by postponing those decisions perhaps indefinitely. This is the primary injustice of precarious citizenship experience, that the states which should grant the citizenship will, for some reason, not do so. Citizenship regimes that produce precarious citizenship fail to meet the moral standards of justice. And a globalized phenomenon such as citizenship requires going beyond merely institutional and formal conception. We need to rethink the institutional notion of citizenship as merely a status held under the authority of the state. The reality of migration has prompted increasing recognition of citizenship as a transnational matter. And we will conclude with this. The situation is part of a broader international context of inequality in which the economies of developing countries feed unauthorized migratory flows, but are unwilling to offer decent living standards to their fellow citizens. Unfortunately, these flows will continue if citizenship, nationality, and migration will remain under the responsibility of the states, rather than being negotiated on the multilateral and cosmopolitan basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejandro and Camelia. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Douglas Bamford, whose presentation is titled Duties in an International World, the Importance of Past Residence and Citizenship. Professor Bamford has a PhD from the Politics and International Studies Department at the University of Warwick in 2013. His thesis entitled Egalitarian Taxation. He has presented his work at international conferences and has published papers in edited collections and in an academic journal. He is a tutor at the Oxford University in the Department for Continuing Education in Philosophy and Political Economy. His research line is in political theory and philosophy, distributive justice, leisure, and distributive justice taxation and benefit policies, and international justice and tax policy. You can speak.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, first of all, I'm going to take this one. First of all, thanks very much to the organizers for the event, and especially Enrique, and also everyone behind the scenes making a hybrid event work, because I know that's very difficult to do. So well done, it's worked very well. So my paper, as was mentioned, the title is Duties in an International World, the Importance of Past Residence and Citizenship. Sorry. Sorry. And so my paper is arguing that citizens essentially retain their obligations to past states and societies, and this is a, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, yeah. This is an obligation which I think that people's current states of residence should acknowledge. And so I'll run you through my argument. In some ways, my paper relates a lot to discussions of brain drain, you might notice, but I do think there's some interesting relationships to some of the things that are being discussed at this conference too. So what I'm going to do in the paper, I'm going to start out with an example of two individuals who are living and working and paying taxes in a state. And then I'll present some justifications for political obligation and the obligation to pay taxes. Then I'll talk about the importance of time and social relationships. And I believe that this time-based issue is an important one, and that it should be applied backwards as well as forwards. And so I'll talk about the implications of this, and if we get time, I'll go through some criticisms. So my two individuals, I've called them Jay and Tanuja, and they both live in a state, I'll call it state A. And Jay is a relatively simple case because Jay was born in state A, has always lived in state A, studied in state A, and now works there and pays taxes there. So Jay is a kind of single state individual. Whereas Tanuja is perhaps the more interesting person for our purposes. So Tanuja was born in state B and lived there for the first 9 years of her life, then moved to state C for the next 9 years, became a dual citizen, so then has citizenship of both B and C, went to another state, state D, to study for 4 years, and then moved to state A, which is the same state as Jay, and has set up a life and a career there. So Tanuja is of a category that I'll call an international individual or an international person. And so if we assume that only state A is receiving tax revenue for Tanuja, as it does with Jay, then I'm going to suggest that there's something wrong with this. So do international residents, do non-citizens, and people with historic relationships to other states really have the same duties as people such as Jay, who only have a single relationship? So I'll start by looking at where the obligations might come from. So why do we have an obligation to follow the law and to pay taxes? And most of the answers to this are going to relate to the benefits that people receive from the state. So this is a topic that's discussed by political, legal philosophers, and there's a lot of disagreement about this, but often the benefits are a key aspect of this. And you might be familiar with social contract theory, consent-based theories, that some sort of consent is what generates this obligation. There's other theories around fairness, which is that you shouldn't take benefits without yourself contributing. to your society. Another type of theory is one of gratitude. So you should be thankful that you've received benefits from your society, and therefore you should want to pass benefits back. And finally, there are associational arguments. And this is based on the fact that you have a relationship. Perhaps you're born into a relationship with your community, and it's that relationship that you're part of, which then generates your obligations. So lots of different arguments here. I think versions of these are quite appealing. Of all of them, some people might find no theories appealing and think that they have no obligations. But I'm assuming for the purposes of my argument that there is an obligation from at least one of these theories of political obligation. So then the main question for my paper is, how are Tanuja's duties then different from those of Jay's? Is there any difference there? And isn't it the case that, according to a lot of those theories, she has duties to the past states, as well as just the state where she currently resides in state A? So I want to say a little bit about the importance of time and social membership here. And I think that it's something that's been discussed more recently by philosophers, and I think that's a good thing. For instance, the distribution of leisure time has been discussed by thinkers like Bob Goodin and Julie Rose, which I think is very welcome. And another book I'll recommend is The Political Value of Time by Elizabeth F. Cohen. And I think particularly relevant to us for our discussions, someone who's been discussed a lot, and I'm sure will be the rest of this conference, is Joseph Cairns. And he has a time-based theory of time and citizenship. And so he argued forcefully that the states where people live, immigrants live, have a moral duty to offer citizenship to immigrants who meet certain conditions, and that these apply even where the migrant was irregular, who wasn't invited into the country. Once they've spent a certain amount of time within the country, they generate a kind of moral membership within that country, in that state. And his argument is that moral membership should there go on to justify a moral right to citizenship. And so this is a theory of social membership, which provides the foundation on which moral claims to citizenship rest, and that people can be members of society even when they're not citizens, and that their membership then gives them moral claims to legal rights. So Karen's theory is intended to show what duty states have with regards to their immigrant populations, whether they're regular or irregular migrants. And he argues that once people have spent a certain amount of time within a state, they become morally entitled to claim citizenship. And my argument is that similar considerations regarding time and moral membership also apply when working out the extent to which people have duties and obligations to their society. And that doesn't make any difference for a single state person like Jay. But when we think about a sort of international individual like Tanuja, then these considerations come into play. And so where international individuals like Tanuja are concerned, the time that people have spent in residence is a relevant consideration when it comes to their duties to past societies and states. And that this obligation increases the more time a person has spent in a particular society in the past. And I think that we can understand this in terms of various of those theories of obligation that we looked at just now, whether it's about the benefits people have received, the gratitude, their association that they have with different communities, with different states. And I think that connection, it stays with that individual even when they leave that society. It's part of their personal history and their personal development, and the imprint of the time that they spent in those other societies remains with them. And so some international citizens might well be quite similar to Jay. Perhaps someone just spends a few years living in another state and then returns to their original state. So they're not too different from Jay. And other people will be a bit more like Tanuja, where they've got this relationship that's fairly equal between several different states. And so I'll run through my proposal about how to implement this, as it were. And this relates in a way to a suggestion that I've made regarding taxation in general, which is that people should be taxed on their lifetime income. So not just each year separately, but it should continue to add up and then be divided to work out an average. The details don't matter. What matters for the purposes of this is that where a person has got a relationship just with one state, that's all straightforward. Where a person has a relationship with multiple states, I would suggest that the revenue should be split between those past states according to a kind of formula based on the strength of the relationship. So I've talked a lot about time earlier on, and I think that time in residence is going to be a really major part of the kind of calculation that I'm proposing. I haven't got the details here. It's just these are the factors within this formula that I would suggest. I would also suggest proportion of time in citizenship could be another perhaps minor factor within this kind of calculation. And I also think there's something special about educational time as well. So if someone's studied, been to school or university in a particular state, that should count for extra as well. And that would also be done in the currency of time. And perhaps you would expect these kind of calculations to be done in terms of money. I'm suggesting that time matters a lot as well, but I do think that income should count as well. And so I would suggest that the proportion of income received by someone in different states should be part of such a calculation as well. So, and that might increase with time as well. The more income someone earns, maybe income becomes more of an important factor as time goes on. But my argument is that these other things should matter as well. So hopefully that's relatively clear, the kind of thing that I'm suggesting. In the paper, I've got a couple of possible criticisms that I'm anticipating. I think one big question is that of political refugees, because it might seem a bit inappropriate that they should owe tax revenue back to a state that they fled. And so I don't think that should be the case. I think that if someone's a refugee, then perhaps that revenue that could go to that state should instead be reallocated somewhere else for international humanitarian purposes or something like that. And that's because you can't claim, well, this person's benefited from a state if they had to flee that state for political reasons, at least. Interestingly, if it's for other reasons, as Stephen was talking about, that might differ a bit. So that might be a wrinkle that I haven't considered there, which I might need to think about. As I've mentioned as well, I do think that citizenship should be a factor as well. So even if someone is a citizen of a country and they haven't really spent much time living there, but they've remained a citizen, I think that that should still count, because people are getting a benefit from being a citizen even when they're not in that country. So if you're living in another country, you're a citizen of your former country, then you still have rights and you still have benefits as a result of that citizenship. You can go to the embassy and seek assistance and things like that. And so that's a benefit that you continue to get from the country of which you hold a passport. So hopefully that's relatively clear. I hope you've been able to hear me okay, because I had to take my headphones off to stop the feedback. But overall then, in the paper, I'm arguing that we should categorize people into either single state individuals or international individuals, and that international individuals retain some duty to their past states and their past societies, as well as duties to their present society. And this should be understood as a kind of relative relationship. It's a kind of a proportionate relationship that someone has to however many states they have a strong relationship with, and that there should be a formula to work out this proportion, that should take into account residence time, citizenship time, education time, and also the grubby business of money. And my argument is that this is a relationship of individuals to states. That's where these obligations kick in. But actually, it's something that states of residence should be the ones to acknowledge. They should acknowledge that some of their taxpayers, some of their residents have duties to other states, and therefore they have a duty to set up and support and pay into a kind of international system that would redistribute these revenues proportionately to those other states. So you create a kind of international system to do this. And so this is kind of similar to maybe suggestions to deal with brain drain. But I think one important thing to note is that it's about individual obligations to states, that relationship between the state and the individual. It's not a kind of an acknowledgement by one state of something that another state has done. It's acknowledgement of the duty of one of their residents to a past state that they need to effectively uphold on behalf of that residence, and obviously hope that other states are going to do that for their citizens as well. So relates to the brain drain issue. I hope you can see how it relates to the issues of citizenship as well that we're discussing on this talk. And yeah, thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to your comments on my paper.
But let me remind our online audience that you can send your questions.
Hi, sorry, was that? My apologies for that. I had several questions for Diego, but I'm actually sufficiently interested in Doug that I want to focus on him for a moment, specifically about some aspects of relationships that I think might be in need of amplification in the analysis you give. And I'm thinking here in particular about an analogy with divorce law. And divorce law, one of the key considerations is about the possibility of a final severing of the relationship. That if I've been married to someone for 20 years and I get divorced and I'm now with my new spouse for 1 year, it would be odd for me to say that I'm still 20 out of 21 related to my previous wife. That would be, I think, a disservice to my current wife. She would be rightly annoyed with me. What's needed there is the possibility of a final severing of that relationship so that a new one can begin. To regard me as an international husband, as it were, would seem to be an odd status for me to live with. And I think that actually reminds us that I think there might be something sort of slippery in the linkage between merely financial instruments, such as repayment of college loans and so forth, and then ongoing assertions of obligation, which to me seem more unbounded and potentially much more dangerous as a result. And that's fundamentally what I wanted to say. I'll put myself back in the queue for later because I also wanted to say something to Diego, but I want to know what you think about divorce and finality.
Thanks very much. That's a really good thought. can see the appeal of that. What got me thinking about this first was issues of tax justice and the fact that people will go off to tax havens and forget all their obligations to, you know, their previous state, and all of their income and wealth will be gone through this tax haven, and it's ignoring that past relationship. So I suppose that's what first got me thinking about this, and then I just started to relate it to other things. What I would say is that I'm not offering a final severance, but people do have the opportunity to stop increasing their relationship. If you leave a state, you take the citizenship of another state, you stop earning income at that state, you're no longer increasing your relationship with that state. So from that point, you've ceased that relationship. I'm saying that you should still acknowledge what you had before, but as time goes on, your relationship with the new state is increasing, so that proportionately that relationship is going to decrease from that point. And if you've already been paying tax to that other state, then it could well be that you won't ever have to pay any more, because you've already paid a certain chunk, and then as time goes on, that requirement is going to not necessarily perfectly reduce in proportion to how things develop, but for some people it will. And so I can't offer you a complete severance, but I think it's going to be, it's for most people it's going to work out pretty well pretty proportionately. And for the people who it doesn't, are probably the kind of people I was first thinking about when I started to think about this, and that was kind of the problem. So I do think people have a bit of a get out because they can sever those ties. I'm just saying they shouldn't be able to sever them 100% for all time in all cases. So it's a kind of a Weasley answer, maybe. That's the best I've got for you. I also had questions for the other panelists, by the way, so I don't know if you have questions in the room. I can't see everything on my screen, unfortunately.
If there's complete dead silence, I have a follow-up, but I also don't want to be the pushy Zoom person forcing myself through. Okay, in the absence of any sign, I'm just going to keep talking. My apologies. I'm worried also, Doug, about the distinction between the refugee and the non-refugee, because it seems like you're saying the refugee gets no benefits and so can't be held accountable, whereas the non-refugee does. And that dichotomy ignores a lot of us in the middle. So a lot of us end up leaving places because the things we're looking for can't be found where we are. And it's not clear that is going to track either side of this debate. So I was reading the history of the Vienna Circle as they fled the rise of Austro-fascism. Some of them were refugees. Some of them just hated Austrian fascism, but could have actually flourished under it. And the line there is very hard to track in terms of refugee or not, but I think it might be difficult to say that refugees got no benefits, and it's also not quite right to say that non-refugees don't have some morally good reasons for severing a relationship, as it were. I'm looking at myself on the Zoom, and my internet might be failing, so I apologize if I'm not coming through, and now I will shut up.
Thanks. I did get that, so it works, so that's good. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I probably... Yeah, no, that's something definitely that I need to think about there. People who might leave, might not qualify as refugees, but feel uneasy about contributing back to a state that they didn't support. Again, I suppose I've got that Weasley get out of saying, well, they're no longer increasing their proportion. They're gradually going to lose that. So that might be the best I've got to offer to the person who wanted to leave for that kind of reason. But yeah, those are things to think about. I noted that down. Yeah. We can't hear the room, unfortunately.
How about now? Is there any sound from the room? Okay, great. Thanks, Doug. So I wanted to ask Diego, maybe just to try to understand your position on universal citizenship a little bit better. What are your thoughts about justa domicile? So, the idea where basically your citizenship is going to track very easily wherever you're physically, residing. Is that part of your proposal? And do you see any problems with that? I think there's a few questions. So I'm going to actually just ask the question to Diego, and hopefully I can ask some questions to the other panelists after. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you very much for the question. In first instance, I didn't thought about it. Well, I'm going to respond. And well, it's kind of difficult for me to elaborate a response in that sense, but I heard a little bit of the topic that an open citizenship could be easier to get, and we can create some problems to fulfill some necessities of the states and citizens, and could cause some economic and several problems to people and so to members in this open citizenship status. But what I believe is that if we see a state as a social relationship like Bob Jessup does, we can understand that it's possible from a distributive justice point of view that if we distribute the economic welfare correctly, maybe, just maybe, this will not create that kind of problems. But this a thought that I've been not working so much, but I have that little intuition about that topic in a specific. So as a first thought, it's what I have in mind right now.
Thank you. Just a quick question for Diego, and then another one for Douglas. Diego, when you described global citizenship as voluntary, it made me think that the analogy would be with domestic civil society, which we do think of participation in civil society institutions as voluntary, not required, but as an important part of citizenship. So citizens participate in groups of various sorts, not just voting, but so is that, my simple question is that kind of analogy what you have in mind when you're talking about global citizenship, that it's that aspect of citizenship that you would globalize?
Yeah, that's what I have in mind. And I thought it with Eduardo like that because we, when we work this paper, these ideas, we get to some authors like Guillen that makes nationality and citizenship as synonymous. And we were like, whoa, nationality and citizenship cannot be synonymous, because we thought and we believe, for example, in the case of Mexico, that nationality is something that you got and something that can be imposed to someone, rather than citizenship, that you can get it, you have to participate, you have to acknowledge the rules that get that membership. So, for example, kids here in Mexico cannot be called citizens until they fulfill that rules that we have here in our constitutional law. So we thought that it could be, with that analogy, it could help to understand a new form or maybe a possibility to universal citizenship.
That's helpful. And just to Douglas, it strikes me as hearing your response to questions and so on that maybe they're like a bunch of smaller problems rather than one big problem. I'm feeling a little skeptical about a kind of a general theory based on time, because some of the problems that you're dealing with, I mean, the tax havens is obviously a big problem, and that should be addressed as such. With respect to educational time, it does seem as though in some instances that's been kind of built into. In Singapore, if you get higher education, I think you sign a contract that you either work in the country for a certain period of time, or the scholarships get turned into loans, which you then have to pay back. So that's a kind of contractual way of dealing with that problem. And I think with other cases, with foreign students going abroad, they pay tuition and they're regarded as a net benefit to many universities and colleges that kind of depend upon foreign students. So there's no deficit there of obligation that's not being dealt with contractually. So I do wonder whether some of these things can be dealt with contractually. And then finally, I just add one other category that you don't mention, which is retirees. So retirees are moving, across countries. And I guess, should we sort of mandate at the global level that they should be paying taxes, or should we leave it to countries who are accepting retirees to decide what makes it a good deal for them? So again, it's kind of a contract where you don't really need a new theory. You just need a country to make sure that they're looking out for their own interests when they decide a lot of retirees can move there. So anyway, those are just some comments.
Yes, thanks for those. Yeah. I'm always looking for a kind of theory of everything. Yeah. In terms of the education point, I was thinking the other day that countries really like having students coming to pay their tuition and so on. So, does that take care of the whole thing? I'm not completely wedded to the education thing. It's just a feeling I have that there's some kind of value added there, which might not be captured by residence time alone. And so it's more of a correction within the formulation, and it wouldn't be a major part of it. And so that's something that I could think about further. And similarly, the retirees, haven't thought too much about that. I mean, they're getting a benefit from being in the place where they're retiring to. Maybe states are they've got ways of dealing with that through consumption taxes or something. So maybe these things are happening, and I'm suggesting formalizing it a bit more. And maybe if you do formalize it a bit more, you might change some of the way things are currently done to compensate for that. So things might even out. And I won't have a problem with that, really. It's where there's people who aren't contributing back, where that's really my main animating concern with this. So things for me to think about, definitely. Yeah, thank you.
Good. I want to maybe follow up a little bit on Stephen's point, and just maybe a suggestion for Doug. My view is the person who's probably thought most carefully about questions of dual and multiple citizenships is probably Reiner Bobach and his theory of stakeholder citizenship. And I thought engaging with some of his work might be useful. I'm also not convinced by time as the right kind of moral grounds for thinking about a connection to multiple countries. And I think even, like in Joe Karen's work, I think time is really a proxy for social membership. So it can be useful, but I think I'd like to see maybe getting to the kind of the heart of, what matters of these relations. So maybe I'll just put that out there. I did have a question for Alejandro, Ruben, and Camelia, and I'm really fascinated by this analysis you've done of U.S. legislation. And I have a question that maybe you can confirm an impression I have, or tell me I'm wrong. I actually don't believe anybody understands U.S. immigration law or policy, and I think you've contributed to my sense of this. But my sense in the United States is there actually hasn't been much significant federal movement by the legislature or by Congress on immigration policy since the mid-1990s. And that where most of really the significant change has been either at the state level or at either executive action or bureaucratic rulemaking. And since you've looked into this topic more than I have, I'm just curious what your thoughts of that, immigration policy is actually being decentralized in significant ways, or bureaucratized. Is that a word? So yeah, that's I wonder if you could shed any light on that.
If you wanted me to give a quick answer, yeah, I just say thank you for the suggestion about stakeholder citizenship, and that's a good point about time as well, not being a direct ground. I think it's probably right. It's a proxy for strength of relationship, for benefits, thinking back to those sources of obligation. And I haven't picked one of those as being key, really. I'm being quite ecumenical about that. I'm trying to be that way. So yeah, it's more of a, it is, I think it is probably more of a proxy, but yeah, I should think about that more and clarify that. So that's really useful. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, about what you just said about there has not been a significant change in immigration law in the United States. Yeah, that is right. The first example is that the comprehensive immigration reform, the last one was in the 1990s. So now it's been it has been a process, a gradual process, and most of what we have found is that this is a longer process that goes far beyond any particular politician. I mean, it is more. It has not to do properly with some particular administration. Let's say the rules that Obama, even Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump was a special case, but in the tendency in just more than 20 years or 2 decades, we have found that it's a gradual process. It has more to do with restrictive forms of legislation and small forms of legislation, and in some point, the only exception can be the laws that has to do with terrorism, with the fight of terrorism and violence. But yeah, that is correct what you just said, and that's what we found in our research study. And actually, for citizenship, it has something to do with that, but in restrictive manners. Thank you.
Thanks. I would also like to comment on that. I was thinking about 2 implications of not having decisions at a federal level, legislative level. I think the most important thing is decisions are taken at the executive level, and that is very important when you think of democracy. That interferes with how people can represent or not politics in the U.S. We see how public opinion is so split in the U.S. around migration, and this can be seen also in the decisions that are taken. So I think that is a dangerous way to proceed. And also, maybe some of you would say, oh, but we had this plan of the enchilada completa and the big reform, but it will never come. Because we cannot, people say, oh, we should legislate step by step. You know, this part we should get citizenship, and this other part of the population should get citizenship. But I think maybe intentions don't matter, because it's just discourse. So when we come to action, which is a legislative action, we show it doesn't have a consequence. And since I had the opportunity to comment, I also liked Doug Bamford's paper. I think it's really compatible to what we propose. And I was thinking maybe this proposal of yours of taking into account education, can that be considered as a way to do some sort of a brain retention policy? And doesn't that increase or contribute to increase inequalities, already existing inequalities, like skilled people, educated migrants already had some chances to improve themselves. So yes, it is right for them to get access to citizenship, but are they more maybe they are you saying they are better at getting citizenship than undocumented or maybe unskilled migrants? Because we've seen that all of them contribute something to the economy. And if we take into account the economic contribution, since unskilled migrants contribute less, then in your scale they would get like more points for less points for citizenship than skilled migrants. So I don't know if this is a problem that Shahara Elet had already mentioned, citizenship to skills. She criticizes that. How do you do to make justice to everybody? And I think just to finish, the refugees should not be taken into discussion or held accountable for anything because they are refugees, right? So it's a forced migration process that doesn't really come into discussion, right? If we talk migrants, we should make exceptions for people who maybe cannot return to their countries. That's it. Thanks.
I would hope that my proposal wouldn't, if it was put into place, wouldn't change people's behavior too much, because it's something that would effectively happen in the background. So there'd be a system which would reallocate tax revenues. And so I don't think it would probably have a big impact on behavior. People might move to where they'll earn more money. It's just that some of that might be shared in a way that it wouldn't be shared without this system. I think you're absolutely right that people with more education have more opportunities. And here in the UK, I don't know if it's gone through yet, but the government's just proposed a law where if you've been to, Harvard or something like that, you can just move to the UK. If you've been to the top universities in the world, a lot of which are in the United States, then we let you come in. But if you've been to the less good university, then we don't care. So interestingly, we've actually got that kind of proposal. And I don't think that my proposal really relates to who gets to move where so much. It's just about sharing tax revenues around after people have moved. So hopefully it wouldn't stop people from moving or anything like that. But I probably should think about that. So thanks for the suggestion.
For Professor Bamford from Esperanta Dumitru via Facebook. Among the reasons for paying taxes, there is social justice. We pay to mitigate poverty. Wouldn't it be more just that everyone, international and sedentary people, pay taxes to the poor people in the world? The idea is that it is important to pay for services, education, etc. But for social justice, it would be better to pay for poorer countries because poverty no time. In Bamford's model, richer countries are advantaged as people go more to the richer countries than to the poorer.
Yeah, so it's not, I think it would redistribute more so to countries where people leave to go to richer countries. That's part of what it's going to achieve. But it's not necessarily a complete theory of global justice. So I definitely say there might be additional duties on wealthier countries, qua wealthier countries, to support programs in poorer countries, which is definitely something to consider. And maybe my proposal would do a little bit to help with that. But I'm not going to claim this is the end of all duties of that kind. It's just not something that I'm discussing, but I do think it's important, and it's also another consideration as well. And I like to think that if somehow magically this ever happened, it would do a bit of that kind of redistribution that isn't taking place as much as it should. But yeah, not everything. So sorry, I'm just repeating myself now. But yeah, thanks for the question. It's a very important issue.
Thank you. My question is for Duke. I was wondering, to what extent do you consider only the obligations from individuals to states only as tax revenues, or also the relationship of the obligations from the state to the individuals? I was thinking, for instance, of a baby born in the UK or in Switzerland, where they don't have any citizenship rights, and they are, I don't know, the family are from Salvador, and they come back to their place, and they do the UK state have an obligation to protect that kid? For instance, if she spent the first 2 years of her life in the UK, for instance, I don't know. I was thinking, to what extent do you complex this relationship the both ways, and to protect also these poor families abroad, and the kids that were born in the territories where their family lives for a period of time, no? That's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that's a really good point. My kind of system is assuming you've got all the relevant information about where people have lived and so on, but in reality, there are kind of undocumented people, and that might impact more on poorer countries. I'm not sure it would make a big difference to the poorer individuals on my scheme, because it's more about redistributing between countries on behalf of individuals. But yeah, it's definitely something I should think more about. And it's not something that part of what your question was, what are those duties? That's not something that I'm directly seeking to address, but I think that those moral questions do arise of what duties countries have to provide citizenship. And I've just said some of those considerations from that literature, I think, are also relevant to these questions about tax distribution that I'm interested in. And so I'm kind of borrowing from people like Karen's, but obviously Karen's has made some strong arguments about duties that I find appealing, but I haven't written about those or anything like that. So yeah, thanks so much. I feel like I'm getting more questions. So I had a question to both of the other papers. I'm trying to come up with a question which I can apply to both. So it's about what the injustice is that it seems like you're both in different ways kind of assuming that there's a justice almost, and I'm not saying you're not right, but that maybe it would be good to clarify for the purpose of your paper exactly what that injustice is. And so who's being denied something they should have a right to, if it's about rights? Who's being denied the citizenship? And because it just seems like in reality we might think that the wrongdoing or injustice differs between different cases. And for me, when I think about exclusion and citizenship, stateless people seem to be the biggest victims of this, right? They don't have the right to be anywhere. They're constantly having to ask for permission. Whereas it seems like a lot of the concerns were about people who have citizenship of a country, but they've maybe chosen, or maybe they didn't choose if they were trafficked or taken as children, but they do have citizenship. And so there are moral concerns arising there, but it just seems like there's going to be different moral considerations in different cases. Maybe I'm not so sympathetic to the Australian who overstays their visa in the UK as I am to some other cases that you might have in mind. And so who's being denied the citizenship that they should be given, I think, is just something it would be maybe good to be a bit clear of in your papers. I only read them once, so maybe I just missed it. But that was just my thought, because I feel like I'm not denied anything. If I go to Spain on holiday and they have an election and I'm not allowed to vote there, or I don't have Spanish citizenship, I don't feel like there's any injustice done to me. It seems like there has to be a higher bar than that. And I had some other specific points, but maybe that provides you something to respond to. So I'll leave it there.
So where is injustice with the people who is denied? It's curious because it's kind of the question that I have in mind to you, Professor Bamford. So I'm going to respond and then I'm going to ask you something kind of similar. I have in mind the people that been denied or suffer a certain way of injustice are people like, I don't know, Central Americans, Mexicans. What I have in mind when I think in citizenship as a exclude concept, I see or believe in people that don't have enough opportunities to get the best of their persons or get the or improve their economic welfare or improve their liberties, for example. It's curious because in the recess I was talking with Professor Sager about this idea and my topics about economic migrants. So what I have in mind is this group of persons that born in a certain state and don't have enough opportunities compared with other states. I know, I think it's Thomas Nagel that have in a paper this idea that justice is a comparative term, that when we evaluate justice or injustice, we point out that, well, I don't have the opportunities that in the United States some people have, or I don't have the same opportunity as that someone in UK have. But if we are participants in an egalitarian world, I think we have to have the same opportunities. So that's what I have in mind when I have the idea of universal citizenship. I believe, or I try to imagine in these persons that don't have the same opportunities, or the states don't given enough to them.
Yeah, I want to say something about the question of law. Yeah, okay. We develop more this issue in the paper, but what I want to say is that injustice consists in the following. The unauthorized migration contribute along with the state in USA. We are focused only in this case of study between USA and Mexico. And in the USA, these people, the unauthorized migration contributes a lot. And in the current pandemic, for example, it was clear how these people contribute with the country in some issues like economic and others. And what we are thinking is that it isn't just that some countries take the advantage of the globalization, like this kind of movement, and don't respond, or they are not responsible for these people. Because if we only focus on the contribution of these people to the country, we have a lot of arguments to give them citizenship. But we have this kind of barriers in the legislation of the immigration that you can pass the status of these people, and they are still precarious citizen, because in this world, I don't know, in the ideal world in which in ethics we think a lot, but in this world, the only way to guarantee the rights of the people is through citizenship. And maybe in another world, yeah, we have human rights and this kind of thing. But in this world, the only way to guarantee the rights is through citizenship. Then these people are excluded to this kind of opportunity. As many people say, they don't have the right to have rights, because in this world, the only way to have rights is through citizen. And for this reason, we think that there is the injustice in this kind of cases. I don't know if Camelia wants to say something, or Ruben.
Yes, just to add what Alejandro said, that there are approximately 11.5 million unauthorized immigrants in the United States. I don't know if we can see the big problem that is here. I mean, it's almost the population of a country of Europe, and these people has not complete access to the rights, full access, and also what about the injustice though? Now we are living in a post-COVID era. We are facing new problems, and for example, people from South America, Central America, now the unauthorized immigrants are increasing, and now because I mean the situation was bad before COVID there, and now it's getting worse. Now there is a lot of people from Venezuela, from Cuba, traveling all the way of Central America and Mexico, and going to the United States and being deported, and also all the population, immigrant population in Africa, I mean, trying to cross the sea to get into Europe, and most of these people, they cannot have full access to their rights. I think that is the main injustice here. Yeah, that's it.
I would add, since we are free, you know, in formal terms, maybe citizenship is simply about not being kicked out of the country, being able to live the life you used to live. Because maybe you say, why not residence? Permanent residence can be an option. Okay, but how can we avoid discrimination? Because then that is a more subjective part. So then we have second-class citizens, and we create some people who will never be able to get full access to vote, to have an influence in the country where they live. So it's not at all the context, the European Union context, maybe, where countries are very close together. You can go back to your country to vote. You can, I don't know, you don't really get kicked out. You can return anytime. This is not the situation with undocumented migrants in the US. Once they get kicked out, they cannot return for maybe 10 years or so. Just imagine what we all know the stories. So, and this is not only the case of the US. I'm thinking now a case of a Pakistani who was working in Canada for 28 years, and he had to check in each, I don't know, month. And he got COVID, and then he couldn't go. He went for 28 years each month. He couldn't go for once, and then he got a deportation order. And he was maintaining his family back in Pakistan. So finally, he had a lawyer, and that lawyer managed to get him not only get permit to stay in Canada, but to get permit of residence. So we go from, from one extreme to the other in this situation. And I think we could have many cases in the US like that. So, yeah, for me, citizenship is not just the word, you know, the passport with your seal on you're American now, but what it implies for the people's life.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think it's an excellent panel full with a lot of challenges. First, I like to ask Doug a question. I always like a lot the work that Doug does, because he always forces us to put the mouth where we put the money, or the opposite. I don't remember how the saying goes. Obviously, if you begin to discuss mouth and money, everything could go wrong very quickly. But the thing is that he forces us to think about practicalities and ways to relate justice with the money, which I think is important. And I wonder if your account may include or deem important how big the welfare state is, depending on the situation of your example. So perhaps if you have been born in a state with a huge welfare state, then maybe you owe more taxes to that state because it actually provides a lot of more benefit than other states. Or if in other case you spend a lot of time in a state that has a precarious welfare state, maybe you are not you don't owe so much taxes because that state doesn't provide you with a lot. I don't know, maybe it's not only time, but also the size of justice provisions that a state may grant you. And also, I had another question, but I think I just forgot. Maybe I just add myself to the queue later. Thank you.
We have, if you don't mind, we can get another question.
It's also for Professor Bamford. It's in the same line discussion. What happened with people that is forced to move and seek better opportunities? I'm going to put an example to explain my mind. Let's think about a doctor who lives in Mexico, studies in Mexico, and for any reason, Mexico don't pay him well, and he had no opportunity to practice medicine as he wants. And he goes to United States, and he now practices medicine in United States. What happened with him? He had to pay taxes because his country didn't support him when he was working in Mexico. Can he form a, like Dorkin says, this associative obligations? Can he just say, I don't want to pay taxes to someone that I not belong to anymore? What happened with that point of this group of persons that doesn't have opportunities?
Douglas.
Great, and it's good that those two questions have come together because there's a similarity there, right? So it's two questions where someone is getting something of less good quality from the state that they've left because either that state didn't have a good system to provide them with good quality services, or in Diego's case, they weren't providing good opportunities. So yeah, so the thought is my proposal based on time doesn't take enough account of the quality of the thing that really matters. So maybe time isn't a perfect proxy there. That's, yeah, something I like a lot of these things I should probably think about more. The lack of opportunity, I don't have a, so the concern is that Mexico is being rewarded in this example for not providing the opportunity because they suddenly get some extra revenue from their citizen who's gone somewhere else that they wouldn't have got. Yeah, I'm not massively troubled by that, I don't think. You know, there's a kind of a calculation here. Their new state is offering them more income, so they're going to get, you know, an ever increasing proportion of the relationship is going to go up over time. They have made them a doctor, which seems like a big benefit. So I don't know if I'm that troubled by this, except to say I've got this issue of quality, which is coming out in both of these examples, which maybe time isn't a perfect proxy for. And so I might have to bite the bullet and say it's the best proxy we've got, and even though it's not perfect. So that might end up being my answer, but I need to think about it more. But thanks, you've had so many questions for me. I do have questions for others, but I'm happy to go, but give others a chance to. Regarding the citizenship regimes, there were statistics within the paper about the success of the initiatives in the American system. I just thought it would be really useful to know more about the difference with other kinds of political issue. There was maybe one or two statistics in there with the comparison, but it seems like that's quite important. If it's a similar average to other issues that are contested of these bills that go through, then it's just saying something general about the American system, perhaps. I don't know. But that was just the thought there, whether it would be useful to have some comparisons. There was one in there, but in terms of the percentage of these initiatives that are unsuccessful, I just wondered if that might make the case more strongly. So that was my thought to you. And for Diego, it's interesting that you mentioned the EU, and you've sort of kind of explained why with your response to my other question, because it seems like you're quite concerned with kind of economic opportunity or opportunity of living your life, and not some of the other things so much with citizenship, like political rights to vote, which other people might put more highly on this concern. Because in the EU case, well, I've got experience of having been in the EU up until recently, and EU residents in the UK weren't able to vote in our general elections, and therefore they weren't able to vote in the Brexit referendum, which I thought was wrong because they're very affected by Brexit. But that was the rule. If you can't vote in the general election, you can't vote in the referendum to leave the EU. So within the EU passport that you get, it does give you these economic opportunities to move that you were talking about, but it doesn't necessarily give you a right to vote in all elections. And so I just feel like maybe within the paper, as my other question hinted, it would be good to say just a bit more clearly exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about citizenship here. And in terms of a possible reference that I thought I might have seen in there, Thomas Pogge had a paper in the early 90s with a kind of a interesting cosmopolitan system proposal, which is a sort of a multi-layered one, which seems to be akin to the EU in some ways. And so I wondered if that would be a useful reference point for you to say, well, you know, the EU is an example of something like this, and Pogge's got a suggestion that could be a kind of a cosmopolitan type system, which isn't just a single global state. There are still localities and so on and so forth. So, so yeah, now I've split out the questions two different ways. But thanks for your answers to the other one. That was useful.
Alejandro and Ruben.
Thank you, Doc. Well, this is a very interesting question. First of all, compared with other topics, immigration has a low percentage of success. I mean, to be approved to other topics. The main topics for USA Congress is taxes and economic issues, and it's really interesting that also that I look in some. We did a research in some surveys, and for example, the last survey I found it was the topic in migration was like the 15 in the 15 place. I mean, when they asked the people what was the most important issue for the Congress, and people answered that it was the 15 place. And in the Congress, with this approval percentage, it was in the place number 14. So it's quite similar. I mean, in the Congress, they are well aware about public opinions, about electoral opinions of people. So, but in the Congress work in legislation, it has a lower percentage of success.
Well, I'm going to answer. First of all, thanks for the reference, Professor. The idea of political rights, we put it in the paper, but we do not elaborate a lot that idea in our text, because we use political rights to distinguish nationality from citizenship using the Mexican example, as I already said. But I remember a book of Sarah Fine and Lea Ipi. I hope I'm pronouncing well the last name of Professor Lea, that says in one of the discussions that book had that residents might have a right to vote, might have a right, political rights. And in that line of discussion, I'm very in tune with this, because I believe if I'm a resident and I participate and I pay taxes and I do some things like citizens might do, why do not have political rights? If a resident pay taxes, participate with society, obey the law, and a citizen obey the law, participate with society, pay taxes. A big difference between citizen and resident I do not found. I only found that someone have political rights and other not, by mere legal status. So that's my point of view on political rights in the discussion of migration and residence and citizenship. So, but thank you for the reference.
Thank you very much to our speakers. And